So just a real quick reminder where we're at. I have a sphere. That sphere has a rigid body attached to it. In addition to the rigid body, I have my force2 script, which I dragged and dropped onto my sphere object. Now the force2 script requires a camera in order to work, because it is referencing the position of the camera. And I want to add a more complicated camera setup, or I should say a more sophisticated camera setup, because it's not very complicated. Now, when I created this sandbox project, if you remember, when I created a new project, and I'll just say File, New Project, I won't actually go through with this. When I created this new project, I left the following packages unchecked. I didn't import any packages at all. I'll just close that. Now, I want to actually access some assets that are bundled with, or that are packaged with Unity. And currently, if I go into the Components menu and I go to Scripts, the only scripts that I see are the scripts that I've included, or that I've created. Okay. Now, I want to gain access to some additional scripts that Unity provides to me. And whenever you're missing a component or an asset inside Unity, if it came bundled with Unity, you can always go to Asset, Import Package, and in this case I want to import scripts. And I'll just say Import. And once I do that, inside my Standard Assets folder, I'll get a Scripts folder. So I've already imported terrain assets, and I've imported skyboxes. Now those are individual components that once I discovered that I needed those components, I've imported those. Okay, so I chose Import Package, and I chose to import things like skyboxes, terrain assets, and so on. So as I discover that I don't have what I need, I'll go look for them. So now when I go to Components, you'll see that at the bottom we have scripts, but we also have camera controls. Now, camera controls allow us to do things like do some real simple smooth follow or smooth look at, but particularly what I'm interested in is this mouse orbit. If I go to the camera object, if I select the camera object and I choose component, camera control, and I choose mouse orbit, I get a script that's attached to my main camera. So if I look over here, I have all these values. Okay, there's a mouse orbit script that's now been attached to my camera, and this doesn't really do anything yet. If I hit play, my camera's not doing anything. Okay, if I hit the fire button, I'm still pushing the my sphere into the general direction of my camera. If I look at this mouse orbit script, it tells me the name of the script. It tells me it needs a target, and currently there is no target that's here. There's a distance and X speed and all these other values, but the thing that I want to load into the target is I want to tell the camera what to look at, or more appropriately, what to orbit around. And the thing that I want to orbit around is my sphere. So this is all one motion. I'm going to click, drag, and drop my sphere into the target of this mouse orbit script. So I'm basically saying, orbit, take the camera that we have here and orbit around this sphere. Now when I hit the play button, the camera's in a different position. It's actually orbiting around my sphere. Okay? Now if you remember, the way that this script works is that when I hit the fire button, it applies force in the direction that the camera is looking. So what I can do now is I can orbit around, and I can actually hold down the fire button and basically steer this thing. Okay, so I'm pushing my marble around, I'm just holding down the fire button, and I'm basically just pushing this thing around based on the direction that I'm looking. So I'm trying to follow this path that I created just to see what kind of control I have over it, because eventually I'll want to, you know, create some obstacles or some hazards along the way, and I want to see what kind of control I have. So with the mouse2 script, this is some basic functionality, or excuse me, the force2 script, this is some basic functionality that we can apply. Now if you want to experiment with some of these values, there's a distance value, and that's how close the camera is to the object, and there's some other variables here that you can adjust to see how those influence the camera's position according to its target object. Okay, so let me review that entire process. And the way that I'm going to review this is that I'm going to select my sphere, I'm going to delete it. So we have no sphere and we have no scripts inside the equation. In fact, I'll take the main camera as well, and I'll remove the mouse orbit component. So we have a standard main camera. We no longer have our sphere into the equation, so I'll just remind you this whole process. So I just have a simple environment here. It's just got a terrain with some textures on it and a skybox. That's all that I have going on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a game object, and I'm going to create a sphere. This is now going to be my marble object. So maybe I'll even name it marble, or bowling ball, or pool ball, or whatever kind of ball metaphor that you're going to use for your game. Name the player accordingly. So I have my marble selected, and if I happen to look over here, I can tell that there's no rigid body that's yet been applied to it. Let me select my marble again here. I'll go to Components, Physics, and add a rigid body. The minute I do that, I now have a rigid body component with some assets that I could influence if I decide that I want to, but I'm going to let things default. So I now have a marble inside the scene that has a rigid body applied to it, and so already, if I lift it up in the air and I hit the play button, I now have this object that will fall into space. I'll turn my simulation off. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to drag and drop a script, in this case the Force 2 script, onto my marble. So now I have some kind of control over it. Now remember, the Force 2 script, all it does is it applies force in the direction of the camera. Okay, so when I hit the fire button right now, I'm kind of pushing it in the direction of my fixed camera. The next thing that I want to do is I want to select the main camera and apply a component, and it's a camera control component. I want to apply a mouse orbit to my camera, and that means that I can control my camera now while I move my mouse around. It orbits an object. Now the only other thing that we need to get the orbit to work is that we actually need the object that the camera is supposed to orbit, and in this case it kind of makes sense that we want to orbit the thing that we're pushing around. So I'm going to take my marble and I'll drag and drop that into the target component for this mouse orbit script. At this point now, when I hit the play button, I have a marble with a rigid body, I have a camera in the scene that has the orbit script applied to it, and so now I can mouse orbit, right? And when I hit the fire button, I can now push the marble in the direction of my camera. So experiment with that process, have fun with it, and we'll continue to push this forward in another presentation.